London and literature are inherently intertwined. London has been the backdrop for some of the most famous stories, like The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes in 1984, and has been a home and inspiration for authors like Charles Dickens and Virginia Woolf. From living here for almost 5 months, it is obvious why so many were so inspired and influenced by the city. Not only the landscapes and history, but also the people can easily provide motivation for any author. And although for many what comes to mind when thinking of famous London stories may be classics like Great Expectations, Oliver Twist, or even Harry Potter, for me there is another standout piece: Peter Pan. I thought it was only right to talk about the story that first inspired my love for this city. So what better than to read the book in the place where it was written and where the inspiration for the story first occurred. Peter Pan was written by UK's own J.M. Barrie, who was born in Scotland and originally wrote the story as a play in 1904. After growing up in and being educated in Scotland, Barrie moved to London where he met the inspiration for the characters in the story, the real-life Lost Boys, the Llewellyn Davis boys. All children, except one, grow up. This is the iconic line the book opens with, describing in essence the titular character Peter Pan. The narrator begins with describing the Darling family, Mr. Darling as the father, Mrs. Darling the caring mother, and their 3 children, Wendy the oldest, John, and Michael, but not without mentioning the children's nurse, Nana, a Newfoundland dog the children met in Kensington Gardens, and who became their nurse as they could not afford anyone else. It is easy to imagine the children befriending Nana in the park, as dogs approaching you there is extremely common, and the number of pets are immense. There never was a simpler, happier family until the coming of Peter Pan. In Chapter 2, Peter makes his grand entrance through the 3rd-story window of the Darlings' home into the children's nursery. Nana senses the danger and attacks him, but fails and only manages to catch his shadow. Mrs. Darling keeps the shadow and puts it away in a drawer, waiting for the right time to tell her husband. She doesn't do so until the night of a dinner party they are to attend, and after an incident with the children's nightly medicine, Mr. Darling ties Nana up outside, leaving her unable to protect the children from what awaits them. After the grown-ups are gone, Peter Pan and his fairy Tinkerbell return to the nursery to retrieve Peter's shadow, but when he is unable to reattach the shadow himself, he begins to cry, which wakes up Wendy. The two begin to have a conversation, and Peter explains himself and his nature by saying, "I don't want to ever be a man. I want always to be a little boy and to have fun. So I ran away to Kensington Gardens and lived a long, long time among the fairies." Wendy helps him by sewing his shadow back on and offers Peter a kiss. But when he does not know what this means, she offers him a thimble, and he gives her an acorn in return. Because of Peter's interest in gaining a motherly figure in Wendy, he tells her that he will teach her how to fly in return for her coming with him to Neverland, and becoming a surrogate mother to him and the Lost Boys. Nana senses the danger and breaks free from her chains in order to retrieve their parents. But they are too late. As they reach the nursery, Peter has already given the children fairy dust and taken them on their flight. "Second to the right," said Peter, and then straight on till morning. The children begin their flight from Bloomsbury, circling around church spires or any other tall objects on the way that took their fancy, and continue through the air for several days before they see the shores of Neverland and are greeted by the cannon fire of Neverland's resident pirates, including their captain, Hook, Peter's nemesis. In this chapter, the island itself is described along with its inhabitants, the 6 Lost Boys, the pirates, the native tribe, and the wildlife, all of which are in constant hunt for each other, but no hunt more intense than Hook's for Pan, as he cut off Hook's hand and fed it to the island's local giant crocodile, who now hunts for Hook herself in search for more than just his hand. On the island at that moment, though, the Lost Boys were outside of their tree homes as they see what they think is a large bird in the air. But of course this is not a bird. It is Wendy, and Tink, speaking from jealousy and hatred, tells the boys that Peter ordered them to shoot down the Wendy bird. One of the boys, Toodles, takes his arrow and, obeying orders, shoots Wendy down. After the boys discover what they had done, Peter returns, and the boys are ashamed that they might have killed their only chance at a mother. Peter removes the arrow from her and notices that the acorn he gave her earlier that she hung around her neck protected her from the arrow, saving her life. Tinkerbell is disappointed by this news, but the boys rejoice and begin to build a little house around where she lies. They beg her to be their mother, and she obliges, telling them a story and tucking them into bed. The next day, Peter begins fitting the darling siblings for their own hollow trees, which the boys use as passageways to their permanent home under the ground. Wendy takes on the role of mother immediately by cooking and cleaning for the Lost Boys, although she did worry about her brothers forgetting their life back home. The narrator begins to mention some of the numerous adventures Peter has had before and during the darling's stay on the island. They tease the idea of diving deeper into several of the tales, but land on one particular adventure of Peter's. The day began at the Mermaid's Lagoon, where the children were all sunning themselves peacefully when Peter senses danger. Pirates. They all dive under the water for safety just before Hook's henchmen Smee and Starkey row into the lagoon with Tiger Lily, the chief's daughter. In an attempt to save her, Peter impersonates Hook and tells the two to let her go. Obeying his orders, they do. Then Hook really appears in a depressed mood as he has caught wind of the fact that the Lost Boys now have a mother. After remembering Tiger Lily and Peter revealing himself as the one to trick the pirates, a fight breaks out between the two groups. Hook injured Peter but flees the battle after hearing the crocodile that is out for him. This leaves both Peter and Wendy on the rock in the lagoon, both too tired to swim or fly to shore, awaiting death as the tide rises. Suddenly, a kite appears, and Peter insists Wendy uses it to get to shore, once again leaving Peter to die, when he recites one of the most famous lines of the book: "To die will be an awfully big adventure." A quote attributed to one of the Llewellyn Davis boys himself, George. Nevertheless, Peter is saved by the Neverbird, a mother to fallen bird eggs who Peter had previously befriended. The bird lends her nest as a flotation device to bring Peter safely to shore, and in return, Peter ensures her eggs are still intact and safe as well. In this chapter, Peter and Wendy's relationship is explored further. As Peter returns from one of his adventures, he and Wendy start to play family, as Wendy is the mother and Peter is the father. This begins the thought in Peter's head that he does not really want to be a father, because that would imply he was old. "What are your exact feelings for me?" Wendy says in reply to Peter's thoughts, to which Peter replies, "A devoted son," which upsets Wendy. Both Wendy and Tiger Lily want a deeper relationship with Peter that he doesn't understand. "There is something she wants to be to me, but she says it is not my mother." Before bed, Wendy tells the boys a bedtime story, as she normally does, but this night in particular, she is to tell a special story, one of her real life back home, of her father and mother. Her brothers listen to the story and only can vaguely remember their parents and their lives back home. Because of this, Wendy begins to think about if her mother is missing her and her brothers. As a result, John, Michael, and Wendy decide they should go home. Peter is upset by this but decides to play it off like he is not bothered. Wendy then tells all the boys, including Peter, that they should come with her and ask her parents if they can adopt them all. Everyone except Peter seems delighted by the possibility, and at that moment, they hear the sounds of a battle above them between the natives and the pirates. Then there is silence. The pirates have won, but trick the Lost Boys into letting their guard down and coming above ground. All the boys, except Peter and Wendy, emerge one by one and are captured by the pirates. They are then carried to the Jolly Roger, Hook's ship. Hook stays behind in order to kill Peter. He finds him in their underground home asleep and decides to poison his medicine that Wendy left for him, so that he will die when he wakes. When Peter wakes, he goes to drink the medicine, but Tink, having heard Hook boasting his actions, sacrifices herself and drinks the poison instead. As she is dying, she thought she could get well again if children believed in fairies. So Peter addresses children everywhere who are sleeping and dreaming of Neverland, and asks if they believe in fairies. Their belief ultimately saves Tinkerbell's life. The story shifts to Hook, on his ship, successfully capturing Wendy and thinking he has killed Peter. In a moment that he should be happy, he finds himself thinking of his days in school, and how disappointed those who used to know him would be in his current bad form. In anger, he orders the boys to walk the plank, but just as they are set to do so, they hear the tick of the crocodile that is after Hook. He is terrified and hides away, but it is revealed that it was in fact Peter impersonating the croc. Peter begins picking off the pirates and then hides in the cabin of the ship. After Peter tricks Hook and saves the Lost Boys, he fights one-on-one with Hook and ultimately stabs him in the ribs, and he jumps to his death in the mouth of the crocodile. As soon as the fight ends, in her true form, Wendy makes the boys go straight to bed, as it is past their bedtime. The boys begin taking on their roles as pirates, and they set sail for land on their way back to bring the Darlings home to London. The story flashes to the Darlings' home, and the narrator talks through in what ways Mr. and Mrs. Darling have mourned their children's departure. When the children arrive in London at the Darlings' house, the adults lovingly welcome all the children as their own, except Peter, insisting that he cannot stay because if he does, he will have to grow up. Peter invites Wendy to come back to Neverland and stay with him, but her mother refuses, with the exception of allowing Wendy to visit Peter once a year to help him with spring cleaning. Over time, the boys forget about Neverland and even how to fly, and when Peter returns the next year for Wendy, even he has forgotten of the adventures they had all had. But after that year, Peter never showed up again, until one year, decades later, when Wendy had grown up and had a family of her own. Peter is saddened by the fact that Wendy is now an adult, and in turn, befriends her daughter, Jane. The narrator ends the story by saying that this cycle continues forevermore, Peter bringing children away to Neverland for adventures, as long as the children are happy and innocent and heartless. The end. At a young age, when I first watched this young girl get swept out of her London home into a fantastical world, I always felt a connection to the tale. The story always stuck with me. The idea of a land where you could go to and never grow up was the ideal life for me as a child and many other kids like me. The experience I have had in London has only made me feel more connected to this childlike feeling. Following in Barry's footsteps around the city and reading the text gave me a newfound appreciation for the story and a more intimate connection to the city that my younger self would be proud of.